These days, many competitive examinations are announced by respective state governments, and the union government also has announced Union Public Service Commission. That means IAS and IPS and other allied services. For all these examinations, English plays a very important role. For every state government's DSC, school assistant examinations, English candidates need English literature and English grammar as well. And Telangana government also announced the DSC, where candidates appearing for school assistants in English need English literature, grammar and other subjects. And so in my earlier classes I am continuously teaching you about English grammar and English literature. So in this class also I teach literature about poetry. Those who are aspiring for competitive examinations and those who love English language can enjoy much reading or knowing about literature. So today's part is poetry. What is poetry, and in what are the kinds of poetry? These things I would like to discuss. There is poetry is of two kinds. One is subjective and objective poetry. From ancient times onwards, man used to think and tell what he has seen, what he has observed around him to others, and that led to a form of poetry. Ancient man, his poetic form was objective, because what he has seen, what he has heard, what were the events that he witnessed, or what were the events that he heard, were reported in the form of poetry, and so that is called objective poetry. And the subjective poetry later, along with the civilization, along with the improvement of man just changed his form of conveying, that is, about the feelings that he had in his mind, about the thoughts that his mind produced, about what he has seen or what he has learned. This is called subjective poetry. Subjective poetry means it is about the mind's production, his own mind's production. It is his personal thoughts. In objective poetry, it is impersonal. Just only he reports as an outsider, as a man watching the things or experiencing the things around him. He reports to others in the form of objective poetry. In the form of subjective poetry, he thinks and his own feelings are reflected in his poems. Suppose Milton, while writing Paradise Lost, we see his personality, we see his thoughts, we see his what his mind produced. And so that way, impersonal and personal poetry, the terms are objective poetry and subjective poetry. So by now you can understand. In a poem like Youth and Age, Shakespeare writes about youth and age, that is as an objective poem. As an objective poem, he wrote that poem. That is youth and age. He observes the youthful passions, the youthful thinking of man, the youthful ideas, youthful gaiety, and comparatively to the aged person, that he becomes cool and impersonal and not attaching to anything much. So that is the comparison between youth and age. The same topic was dealt by Coleridge, S.T. Coleridge, as a subjective poem. That he says, as he involved in his youth, as he involved in age, he wrote the ideas in that poem, Youth and Age. Shakespeare's idea is objective. Coleridge's idea is subjective, because he, as though he experienced, as though his ideas about youth, whatever he experienced were written in that poem. Whatever his experiences about the age, as an aged person, he wrote in those poems. So in both these two writers, we can see very clearly about objective ideas and subjective ideas. But now I shall read a few lines in Shakespeare's Youth and Age. Cradle age youth cannot live together. So wonderful life's experience. As an observer on youth and age, he writes these lines. That is, cradle age and youth cannot live together. So that means youth and age pass away. They are not stationary. They are not permanent. So a universal truth is in these two lines. Youth is full of pleasure, age is full of care. So wonderful comparison of youth and age. Youth is full of pleasure, but he does not care about anything in his youthful age. He cares only for what pleases him, what he loves. But age is full of care. So now we can understand that an aged person is much careful about his own self, his own family, his own future, and his own possessions, and about his own life. So age and youth are compared here in such a beautiful manner. So youth like summer morning, age like winter's weather. This youth is like summer morning, and age is like winter weather. Youth is like summer brave, age is like winter bear. Youth is full of sport, age's breath is short. Youth is full of sport. Oh, he's a very sportive man. He takes everything very sportively, in a very challenging manner. Even Himalayan task is not a hurdle for him. He thinks everything is possible. He runs to overcome the difficulties in his youth. But age is full of, breath is short, youth is nimble, age is lame. Youth is hot and bold, age is weak and cold. Youth is wild and age is tame. So this is Shakespeare's Youth and Age. So compare, as an observer, as an outsider, he saw the tenets of youth, feelings of youth, and actions in youth in comparison to the age. So the same thoughts are explained by S.T. Coleridge in his poem. When I was young, woeful, when I, for the change, twixt now and then. I was young, I thought that the youth was, youth does not leave me, youth does not separate from me, but it is imminent for me that for the change is inevitable for me. I understood it. Change is inevitable for me. Twixt now and then. This breathing house, not built with hands, breathing house, he calls the human body as a breathing house, not built with hands. This body that does the grievous wrong. So that means every time it goes on change and change and change, and finally man comes to understand that he is this body is not permanent for him. The body in which he is living is not permanent for him. It is something like a rented tent. He understands it, and it leads to a kind of gloom that is change. Over airy cliffs and glittering sands, how lightly then it flashed along, like those trims skiffs unknown of yore, on winding lakes and rivers wide. Wonderful line, on winding lakes and wonderful rivers wide. So this is youthful gaiety. It is something like a passion going around the nature, going around the widened lakes and widened rivers where cool breezes upon into the nature. So this is all a wonderful experience of youthful gaiety. That fear no spite of wind or tide, not cared this body for wind or weather, when youth and I lived in it together, when youth and I, so he's personally, he has now taken a personal note, that is, youth and I lived in it means in the body together. So this is purely a personal feeling, personal poem. A poem tells about his personal feelings. Flowers are lovely, love is flower-like, friendship is a sheltering tree. Oh, wonderful truth is in it. Friendship is like a sheltering tree. The joys that came down, shower like of friendship, love and liberty. Before I was old. Before, I use this word before, but actually in this poem it is ear. E-R-E-R is written here. Ear means before. Before I was old. So I enjoyed joys in nature, joys that came into my fold, that came down shower-like, and I enjoyed them before I was old. So this is a purely subjective poem. Subjective poems and objective poems, or subjective poetry and objective poetry. As I told you earlier, that ancient man wrote only subjective poetry, because by the time he has no faculty of producing what he has thought in his mind and communicating it to others. He did not think it was important. He thought it was important. What was important was just only what he had seen and what he had observed around him. When in this way we go through our epics and folklore, very importantly folklore and epics, they are purely objective poems. They come under objective poetry because what they have seen, the writers, what they have learned, what they have understood around them, the things and events, they reported in them, in those um, in those two aspects. One is epics, and the other is folklore, very importantly. And later writers, almost in a very advanced stage, they thought that subjective poetry was important. Subjective, I told you already, that is what his mind focuses, what his mind produces, what his mind instructs him, what he thinks that the instruction of his mind is important to impart to the people. That gained importance, and hence almost all writers focused on subjective poetry. But one thing is very clear: we cannot distinguish subjective poetry and objective poetry on a scientific line. No, it is not possible. Sometimes even in objective poetry, writer's mind and writer's thoughts, writer's ideas go into them and influence the readers or the listeners. Likewise, even in the subjective poetry, objectively what he had seen and what he had thought, they will creep into his writings, and in his communication, we cannot scientifically demarcate what is objective poetry and what is subjective poetry. It is only for the convenience of our understanding what ancient man thought and what today's man is thinking. Just to make a clarification, we are making a sense of out of it. Otherwise, we cannot demarcate totally. So that is what poetry, objective poetry, and subjective poetry.